Now, this final roundtable discussion is being brought to you by the Canadian Mining Journal, and their editor is Alicia Hyatt. So, Alicia, take it away.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It's my pleasure to introduce our experts for the final roundtable of the day on mine closure. Ken Bocking is, can you hear me? You can hear me. Can everyone hear me? A little louder, okay. Ken Bocking is a geotechnical engineer and principal of Golder Associates. With more than 43 years of consulting experience, Ken has considerable expertise in geotechnical and environmental engineering for mine waste management and the design, permitting, and costing of tailings management facilities. Mine closure planning has been a significant part of his practice since 1992, and Ken has written papers and delivered lectures on the topic at conferences internationally. Douglas Morrison in the middle. You saw him on the first panel of the day, but I'll introduce him again, just in case you weren't here. Douglas Morrison is the president and CEO of CEMI, the Center for Excellence in Mining Innovation. Before joining CEMI in 2012, Douglas spent 16 years as a consultant with Golder Associates, where he worked on strategic mine design, productivity, and safety issues. He also has 14 years of operating experience in the deep nickel mines of the Sudbury Basin. And Stephen Wolfenden is Director of Environment for IAMGOLD, where he leads environmental assessment and approvals processes. Stephen also works with operations to implement and integrate sustainable mining practices and oversees mine closures and management of several legacy sites. In his more than 20 years of environmental management experience, Stephen has also worked for the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, managing the technical review and assessment of large projects in multiple sectors. Welcome to all three of our panelists. And thanks for moving out here and making it a little bit more intimate, since we have a smaller panel for our final panel of the day. So in a lot of ways, mine closure brings us full circle back to the first panel of the day, roundtable of the day, excuse me, which was CSR. A lot of the resistance that the general public has to mining is on environmental grounds, and it has to do with mine waste. It has to do with a lot of the things that we leave behind when mines are closed. And a lot of it is maybe based on perception rather than reality, but we'll talk about that a little bit. So I want to open up with a question for the roundtable about the direction the mining industry is trying to go with regards to mine closure. What is the goal for the industry in terms of what we leave behind after a mine is closed? And is that goal good enough considering the expectations of the public? Ken, you want to start?
I think that, well, mine closure is a pretty new thing. Alicia mentioned that I started on it in 1992. Why? Because that's when the law came in Ontario. And until that time, basically, mines would live out their useful life, and then many of them just walked away. Which was unacceptable, and certainly, in terms of CSR, very bad. So after that time, all active mines in Ontario, and this spread across the country and now across the world, they basically have a thought-out closure plan. What are they going to look like when they finish mining? And they put up financial assurance in the hands of the government to fund the closure should they walk away. So that's where it's at now, that there is funding in place. Sometimes it's insufficient, but there is funding in place and there's a plan. But what hasn't been done to any great degree is actually implementing closure. So there's not very many mines that have been completely closed and to the point where they can walk away and the land can be returned to the Crown. So I think that's where it needs to go next.
Sure. Well, first, thanks everyone for staying. A couple times we've organized meetings inside IAMGOLD about mine closure, and kind of what happened is almost half the audience gets up or the people in the meeting get up and leave. So thank you for staying for this session. Reality is that when you look at mine closure in the overall life cycle of a mine, it's actually the longest phase of a mine. The exploration into development, 15, 20 years, sometimes 10 if you're lucky. You know, the operations, 10, 15, 20 years. Then mine closure is well beyond that. So, you know, I'm managing some legacy sites, as mentioned, that are 30, 40, 50 years old, and there is no end to that management. It will be in perpetuity. They have high capacity dams that are high risk structures, and we are going to be managing those forever. Certainly if you look at uranium mines around Ontario, the Bancroft area, the owners of those are operating those forever, same as Elliott Lake. So it's a big chunk of the phase when it comes to mining, and most people really don't pay much attention to it, because when you do the costing on mine closure, it's pushed so far out and discounted so much that it doesn't really impact it. But when you get there and you actually have a closed mine, it actually costs you a lot of money. And even some of these small legacy sites that we at IAMGOLD have that are in Quebec, there were Cambior mines, they're relatively small footprints, but they cost us money every year to manage them. People got to monitor them, people have to cut the grass, people have to trap the beavers to deal with water management issues. It is quite expensive and not particularly a very sustainable practice. So, you know, my view is I'd rather see at the front end a lot of planning, and maybe I'll let you talk about that, but move the planning for closure at the front end, you know, plan for closure, build that into the structure at the front end so that you might actually have a walk-away scenario. We were lucky at IAMGOLD to actually walk away from one mine called Dunrain this year in Quebec. We have two that there's no way we're walking away from them, and we're going to have to accept that. So it's really rare. I think, though, when we look around even this province, there is lots of legacy sites that we need to work on, and there's lots of ways we can do that. And in this industry, I think we need to often engage with regulators on mine closure. They're actually managing, I think, more closed mines than we have as the industry, and I don't think they know what to do with them. So I think it's, some respects, our responsibility as the miners to actually engage the regulators on how to actually close mines.
Yeah, I guess the place I would start is to say innovation number one has to be to bring the conversation about tailings and waste management to either the first or the middle of the day, not the end of the day when everybody's already tired and getting kind of bored and waiting for the bar to open. This is the wrong time to be talking about tailings and waste management. And the reason for that is because it's the single most important thing and the longest thing that our industry does. And it's the most important thing because nobody in the public could care less what we do on the ground, what our productivity levels are, what the return on investment is. They could care less. They absolutely care what we do with our waste streams, wastewater and solid waste. This is where our industry interacts with the public, and it's where the public is getting really, really tired of hearing what we do. Because somewhere in the world, once or twice every single year, there is a tailings dam failure. That is devastating for the company that actually is responsible for that dam, but it's also troublesome for the entire industry because running a tailings dam, A, is not that complicated. Sorry, Ken. But B, is really, really important because the failure of a tailings dam undermines the credibility of the industry as a whole. What it does, it makes it all the harder the next time to get a permit or social license for the next tailings dam, wherever that's going to be. My colleague here already mentioned the really, really scary word, which is many of these closure plans are in perpetuity, which is a really, really long time. And what it actually means probabilistically, from a statistical point of view, is there is a guarantee of failure sometime in the future. That's what a probabilistic analysis is. If the time is infinite, something is absolutely going to go wrong. If many more people in society knew that that was the case, we'd be in much greater trouble than we're in now. Fortunately, they don't, and fortunately, we're already making steps to come up with other solutions, which we'll come on to next. But this is the wrong audience. I absolutely appreciate that you all stayed, and we need to go and talk to the other people who left, because this is the single most important part of the day.
Let's stick with tailings, and maybe Doug, you can start this. What technologies are you working on at SEMI to alleviate some of the public's concerns around tailings?
Well, we're working on several technologies. The standard approach to tailings and waste management today is subaqueous deposition. We'll be using it for 30, 40 plus years, and it's a standard technique. And it involves storing a large volume of water behind the dam. That's also where all the risk is. If you didn't have water behind the dam and you have a breach of your containment system, that unsaturated tail would actually go nowhere. So the risk is all related to the water. We in Canada don't think we have a water problem. We absolutely do have a water problem. We just pretend we don't. But you can't pretend not to have a water problem in Southern Africa, in Australia, and then the arid countries of South America. So they are much further down the track on trying to address these issues than we are, but we have much greater capability to solve the problems than I think they do. And that's why we should get on this. One of the alternatives to subaqueous deposition is sequestration, separation and sequestration. The fact is, 80% of the material in any metal mining tail is benign. It's clay and inert solid materials. We could dispose of that 80% with very, very low-cost systems, and that product could be laid out, and we could actually be having alternative land use on that product very, very quickly as cells, individual cells. So the other 20% is where all the problems are. Right now, what we do is we take the 20% and we equally distribute it through the 100%. So now we have a huge volume of tailings that is problematical rather than a smaller volume of tails. Yes, it's possible to look at dry stacking, and that's one of the things that people would like to look at, but I don't think you can go to dry stacking of the product that currently comes out the back of the pipe, out of the process plant. You're going to have to do additional processing in order to do some of that separation and sequestration. Then it makes it much easier to deal with 80%. And the benefit of that is you can categorically show the public that you have dealt with 80% of the waste stream absolutely securely, and it won't need further ongoing intervention in perpetuity. Because in perpetuity is a really, when you know what it means, it's a really, really scary thing in perpetuity. So that's one of the things we've started to look at. And the other thing we've tried to do is to say, look, the innovation process is like a journey. And most journeys have really interesting viewpoints that you really want to stop at. But a lot of the journey is really quite boring. You're just getting from A to B and from B to C and C to D. We've focused on just the individual components that have to be done to make these other alternatives possible. There are many commercial companies out there, including this one here and this one here, who are very, very good at managing 90% plus of the process. What additional components do we have to make alternative possible? Because it's very great to talk about innovation at a high level, but as soon as you come down to actually digging in a tailings pond, there is somebody looking over your shoulder, usually called the Ministry of something, who wants to be sure that you're not creating more liabilities. So there are very, very hot spots that become very hot very fast as soon as you put a single shovel into a legacy tailing site. Those sites are extraordinarily valuable to us as testing sites for new technologies. But we have to have the kinds of techniques that we need to assure the public through the Ministry of Northern Development and Mines, in our case in Ontario, that we're not creating more liabilities on the way to a better solution. So that's where we are so far. Ask me another question, I'll give you another diatribe.
Just a question about dry stacking for Ken. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about why it's not a more viable solution for more operations.
Well, some of you may be aware of dry stacking. It's a new thing, and it's got a lot of talk since the Mount Polley failure, because although Mount Polley didn't fail because of overtopping, it certainly was made much worse because of the presence of water. And so the report suggested that the industry should look at dry stacking, which means you filter the tailings to, they're not dry actually, but they're moist, and then you stack them up rather like a landfill. Intuitively, that has a lot of merit because it takes when you take the water away from it, you take a lot of the risk away from it. Unfortunately, as in many things in mining, it's very expensive, and I say that as someone who's actually designed a facility. It's expensive to build a filter plant in terms of CapEx, and it's expensive to do it in terms of OpEx to haul and place the tailings. So I think there will be places where, because of special circumstances, it's justified and it will be done, but it's not going to be a general solution because of its cost.
Thanks, Ken. Steve, you're in charge of mine closures and management of several legacy sites at IAMGOLD. Are you trying anything new with regard to mine waste at any of those sites?
I mean, sure, yeah, I can speak to a couple somewhat innovative techniques, and they've already been discussed. So everyone knows IAMGOLD has an old site called the Tailings mine. It was principally mined in the 70s. For a long time, and now we have our new Westwood gold mine, which it sits pretty much on the same site, brownfield site. We reuse a lot of the infrastructure from the Tailings mine was repurposed into Westwood. But with Westwood, there are several large tailings facilities. They're quite expansive. They were relatively low elevation dams, but then they took up large expanses of landform. And to close those out, also, just to add some extra context, all of the tailings are reactive. Every rock, I think, that came out of Tailings was acid generating material. And so it's everywhere. The dams are made out of it, our tailings are made out of it, roads are made out of it. So we have to, right now, capture and treat a large volume of water, and we want to bring that down. It's quite costly to do that from just the process, high density sludge plant, and then we run a high density sludge plant, and then we end up with a lot of sludge, and then we have to deal with that as well. So we have moved up and are pushing more of a progressive reclamation. And part of that plan is to actually use the tailings from Westwood to generate clean material to cover these other facilities. And to do that, we have to desulfurize them, so strip the sulfur content out, which has some other benefit. It's going to be tested, may actually strip some other metals out, which we can send to the Horn plant and get some cost recovery there. So that's one. The Quebec government is open to it. We certainly have to demonstrate through some research programs, probably with UCAT, that it's going to be a viable alternative. Because the only other alternative is we go find borrow sources in the area and we dig those up, which also has an impact. So if we can use our tailings, it's probably about cost neutral, but it's a much better, more sustainable practice in the long run. We also have a small mine that sits in our Côté Gold land complex in Ontario called the Chester Mine. In its closing of it, which is active right now, we realized we ran out of topsoil. There's no overburden. It seems to have disappeared. Some topsoil fairies have taken it away and done something with it. So we were short. We don't have enough. It's quite expensive to bring in overburden in that part of the country north of Sudbury. But we found a source of biosolids. So sitting right here today, when you flush the toilet, sewage went down to the Ashbridges Bay treatment plant. They have a biosolids plant. Those biosolids that are produced at the Ashbridges Bay are principally used to supply farms. A lot goes into Holland Marsh and around the GTA. But they don't use that material from like November to March. They can't put it on the farm. It gets stockpiled. So it becomes very cheap. And the company that has a contract to move it was quite happy to truck it to our site north of Sudbury, 2 hours north of Sudbury, to spread it around. So it took us about 8 months to get that approved with MOE, even though it had been used on another site. But we finally got through the approvals. It has been laid down just this September, and we will be monitoring the effectiveness of that material as a growth medium.
What about environmental monitoring? There's a trend towards longer monitoring of closed sites, but are there new technologies that are making that more feasible? I don't know, maybe Ken wants to take that.
Yeah, there are, and that's certainly a trend that's happening. The early closure plans, they typically said, okay, we'll implement the closure measures, we'll monitor it for 5 years, and that's the end of the story. Certainly in Ontario and Quebec, all mines will always have runoff because of the precipitation exceeds the evaporation. So there will be runoff which could be contaminated and therefore needs to be monitored. So the regulators and the industry are, I think, agreeing now that we need longer monitoring periods and more thorough monitoring. There's also monitoring required for the long-term stability of the tailings dams and so on. And those things can be, there is innovation possible there. I've seen the use of wildlife monitoring, which is actually just automated cameras that fire when there's motion. Certainly in my own field of geotechnical engineering, a lot of the monitoring equipment can now be automated and can send the data out. I do dam inspections, and I think some of the more routine dam inspections could probably be done by drones and virtual reality and that kind of thing. I wouldn't take the human element out of the the annual inspections. But so there's lots of room for innovation to make that long-term monitoring component less expensive and more effective.
Yeah, I don't think we should ever take the human element out of it either, but if you compare how we typically monitor tailings facilities in the country and compare the kind of autonomous monitoring that they have on farms, for example, it's actually an embarrassment. When you look at the quality of data that farms produce and the precision with which they apply the various chemicals and the other things that they need to do versus how we continue to monitor our tailings facilities, it really is. We're a long, long way behind, and it's simply a question of bringing in that technology and implementing it as soon as possible. There are some pieces that we have to do. We've worked with a group at McMaster who were actually not involved in mining at all. They hadn't heard from anybody in mining until we turned up. And they've already developed a technique that we're now commercializing, which is to autonomously monitor dissolved metals in water down to very few parts per billion. So very, very small numbers, and to be able to do that remotely and be able to change the sampling times. So we go from winter time to spring runoff to summertime to the fall, and be able to change that just from a computer laptop and have the results emailed down. This summer we'll be using that in the tailings facility we're reclaiming with one of our commercial partners. And in that case, we will be doing the autonomous monitoring along with the typical conventional sample monitoring that we would do, that we have to do to meet the current regulations. If we don't have that capacity and we can't demonstrate to the ministry that this newer technique is just as valid as the old sampling technique, there are many legacy tailing sites in the province that we can't readily do anything with. And the reason for that is because they're so remote. We have to take a sample, have it analyzed on a 48-hour cycle to meet the regulations. And it's just too far. You can't get there from here in 48 hours. You can't go there, take the samples, and have that whole thing done. So developing techniques that allow us to do remote monitoring as accurately, if not more accurately than sample techniques, than physical sample techniques, opens up a whole slew of opportunities for us. But it also opens up for these SMEs that we're working with the opportunity to take that technology to other countries in the world where their water management issues related to tailings are much more critical than we think ours are. I actually think, and I'm sure Ken agrees, that many of our issues are important and critical, but the level of attention that gets paid is perhaps not as high as it is in other countries, and it's not as high as we tend to focus on mine productivity. Mine productivity and returns on investment, that's the top bill, and it has been most of the day. This is where our industry interacts with the public, and we have to do far, far better. We're already moving down the track of developing technologies that will help us do that, but we do need to capitalize on the progress that's been made and make these things much more readily available and be uniformly applied across the country. Once we are doing it as Canada, as in so many things to do with tailings, the Canadian consulting companies and contracting companies were the leaders in developing the current technologies that we have, and I expect that those same companies will again be the leaders in the changes that will take place in the global management of tailings and waste management in the future.
Sure, I mean, I'll speak a little bit about biodiversity monitoring. So we're lucky in Ontario here to be sitting near the University of Guelph, which has the Biodiversity Institute. They are the founding institute in the world to really initiate DNA barcoding as a process. And with that brings a lot of technology and expertise at that university. There's a number of mining companies, IAMGOLD's participating in it, that are starting actually next week. There's a meeting next week to actually use genomics to study biodiversity and to apply it to the environmental effects monitoring programs that are required during operations, but that easily will extend into closure. So basically what it will simply be is, instead of having to send an individual out to the field to collect water samples, to collect bug samples in a creek, or actually capture fish and do samples, you can actually just take a water sample. For the benthics, you probably have to do a scraping, and that samples will just go right into a little box, a little PCR machine, which will sit at a mine and be processed within 5 minutes. You will have the data as to what species are in that river and relative abundance, versus the old way of doing it, which we do it right now, is we send people to the field, they take samples, they have to preserve them properly, they go to a lab. Labs are historically, and testing is showing that they are not consistent with identifying certain invertebrates and other species, but the PCR machine does not lie. It is based on the DNA available as long as an individual is barcoded. And the University of Guelph has a large bank of species already barcoded, and whether or not, I think the number of mining companies that are participating in the study, we're going to fund that to further increase the number of species they have in their bank. So that will be a game changer for EEM program and into closure, because it will simplify and give us better data than we can get now at a fraction of the cost.
This one is open to anyone who wants to answer. What are the advantages of progressive closure, excuse me, and why is it not more widely embraced in mining?
I'll start on that one. There's great advantages to it. It's actually part of most closure plans. It says progressively we're going to do it. I should explain, the term means activities that you do during operations to bring the mine closer to closure. So if a particular tailings cell is no longer used, you can close it out while you're still operating in another one. I think there's many advantages. One of them is that you can use that to practice and verify your closure technique. So if you can close out one tailings cell and revegetate it, then you can learn from that and apply it elsewhere. There's also financial advantages, because the financial assurance that you put up, if you then progressively do some of that closure, you can claim some of that back. So you're liberating some of your financial assurance and putting it back in your pocket. And to some extent, you can use that liberation to help fund ongoing closure. Why are they not doing it more? I don't know.
Okay. 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 So a lot of the problem with dry stacking and progressive closure is the content of the actual tail itself. If you do the separation and add a little bit more processing cost to the end of the pipe, then you can take out a lot of the really benign material and progressively close that very quickly without any trouble at all. That does two things. It shortens up the whole process, but it also gives the public greater assurance that they can actually see within 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years what it is you're doing and how well that's being done. Having to wait 50 years to be assured that the mining company, who might not be the same mining company 50 years from now, is going to manage that tailings pond when their grandchildren are actually living around it is a really big question mark, and that question mark is becoming a bigger and bigger question mark for populations all around the world. Clario has estimated there's about $30 billion worth of mining projects that are currently held up because of public concerns over environmental impact, waste management, and wastewater management. That's why this topic is so important, because it's actually holding up projects, and we've even seen, of course, in the last few years, that occasionally some projects that are entirely declined. No, we'd rather you didn't start mining here, please just go away. That's not a good answer for our industry. The minerals that our industrial economy needs are not uniformly distributed across the planet, and we have to mine them where we can find them. That's why we actually have to have a superior performance in this field more rapidly than in almost any other field. So yes, we need to move to this. It allows us to shorten up the time period of the actual closure plan itself, but the other thing it does, if we can provide the public with greater assurance of what they define as responsible environmental performance, then we actually get permits sooner. Over the last decade or two, we've seen the time to a mine permit becoming longer and longer and longer. And if that time period gets long enough, in Canada, for example, then people lose interest. It becomes really much less worthwhile to actually mine the deposit, and the capital for that whole project will go elsewhere in the world. So delays to projects are killing projects. And so if we can provide greater assurance early on to the public of how we might manage these tailings into the future being a finite number, whatever that number is, as opposed to in perpetuity, if we can provide the public with greater assurance, then we get to move forward to the actual production phase faster than the trends indicate at the present time.
Steve, I'm interested in your perspective as an operator.
Sure. I mean, to echo some of Ken's points, especially around finances, I mean, I think one of the things we've been challenged with respect to progressive reclamation is the question of why do it now? Why pay for it now versus just kicking it down the road? You know, your executives might be gone. They're like, I don't want to have to deal with it. We're in the business of mining, whatever it may be, and somebody else can close it. And I think I've run into that in my time in mining where people, that's their view. Hey, we're here to mine for IAMGOLD. We're here to mine gold. Why are we talking about closing? But it's part of the industry, and there are all these other indirect effects. We need to demonstrate, it's like saying that we're responsible, and part of doing progressive reclamation is demonstrating that. Now, when you actually look at the operations, one of the things I think we need to, and it's not particularly innovative, is actually develop some KPIs for our GMs. Most of them don't seem to have KPIs with respect to progressive reclamation. They're all on ounces produced, cost reductions, various other metrics, but not an actual progressive reclamation. So that's something we need to work on. And I'll just touch on it, take the opportunity now. There is collaboration. There was other discussions about having to collaborate. On the mine closure front, one of the good things we're seeing is that a number of mining companies, we all put up our hands and said, guys, we need to start talking to each other. There was a model in Australia. They created the Australian Mine Closure Working Group. So there is now, it's in its formative year and a half, the North American Mine Closure Working Group. It consists of a number of the majors. You can guess who's there: Rio Tinto, BHP, Teck, some of the big gold companies, a couple smaller ones like IAMGOLD. We're really like the little baby mining company right in that group. Who we're contributing though as best as we can. So that is a good thing right now, because part of the discussion is about this progressive reclamation. How do we push that agenda? How do we make executives in these mining companies realize it's a good thing? When the cycle is up, that's the time to invest into progressive reclamation. And then if the cycle drops down, you can pull back a little bit, you know, and preserve the balance sheet. But when the time and there's money is available, it should get done. It really does help. When we look at the numbers in our ARO calculations and our LOM plannings, it does benefit the balance sheet when you can actually get these liabilities off of them. And we've been able to demonstrate that inside IAMGOLD on one particular project, that it did pay to actually perform progressive reclamation versus pushing it down the road. So that was a big piece that we used the numbers. I'm not a finance guy, but we used finance and we used the financial numbers to make that case and sell the argument, and it worked.
Thanks. Oh, go ahead, but keep it short because we want to get to the audience question.
We got to get to the drinking.
Yeah. Well, just to the same point, I mean, the closure financial assurance is by accounting standards has to be costed based on, it presumes abandonment, and then a third party comes in and closes the site. And so those costs are high. But when a mining company is on the site with its big equipment and its staff and its knowledge, it can do the same things cheaper by doing it with their own forces. So there is a financial advantage in doing it that way.
Okay, maybe we can do two of these. Are the number of mine closings going up, remaining stable, or declining over the next 5 years in North America?
Just one of us answer. You answer that.
Does anyone want to answer that one?
Ken, do you know?
Okay. Well, I think they must necessarily be going up. But I would make the point that I think the industry is a little bit stalled because they have the closure plans in place, they have the financial assurance in place, and there's no question there's billions of dollars that are locked up as financial assurance. But what is kind of slow is the actual implementation of closure. So there's an awful lot of properties that are on care and maintenance or state of inactivity is another term for that. And sure, some of them have residual ore values that they should stay in that state because it might be viable to reopen them, but a lot of them are not in that state. And I think we're going to necessarily see that mining companies are going to move, they're actually going to implement closure on some of these sites. I certainly hope so.
And we'll do one more. Are mining companies doing enough to define mine closure requirements at the early stages of exploration and development? That goes to your earlier point.
Sure. I mean, I think it's good practice now if you're in the development stage that you really are applying the concept of design for closure. It's got to be in the thinking. And so we're working on the front end of a new gold mine in Ontario, and as the director of environment, I'm not running the fee study, I'm not doing the engineering design, but every meeting I go to, I challenge the people that are doing that work to constantly think about closure. How is that tailings facility going to be closed? How is that mine rock going to be closed? What are we going to do about water management? So it's ingrained in their thinking, and they're addressing it. Certainly it is a requirement though in Canada for most EAs to have conceptual closure plans. But I think it's how far you take that in that conceptual. You can simply put motherhood statements that you're going to, revegetate the site and do these things. That's not particularly helpful. I think better practice is to work through and have some data about how long is the pit going to take to fill, how long will it take to vegetate, what type of material is needed, and what type of volumes. So that at the front end, you actually have some idea whether it's actually technically and economically feasible.
Thank you so much, guys, for a great discussion. Please give them a round of applause.
Thank you. Excellent, thank you. And I got something cool to show everybody. So sit tight. I'm going to take you through something for 5 minutes, and then we're going to start the social part of the afternoon. Michael, if I can switch over to the, whatever the podium mic there. Check, check. Great. Okay. So we have something here that we're launching called Northern Miner, or just TNM actually. TNM Alpha. Let me pull it up on the screen for everybody. Okay. Why am I not seeing it? Okay, can I get this? There we go. All right. TNM Alpha. Now, for any developers out there, this is not alpha in the sense that you know it. In the development world, alpha, I guess, is something very early stage. In the investment world, alpha is the Greek that we use to define return over market return. So every great investor generates alpha because they're beating the market. So that's what we're calling it now. We're just getting ready to launch the beta form of it. What this is you're going to have the ability to get all of your Northern Miner news down the main column there. So that's all your in-depth Northern Miner coverage that you're already used to getting. Along the left, you have your recent articles. We'll be adding feeds from mining.com and faster news sources. We're getting something going with Thomson Reuters as well. So you'll have your faster, quicker news there, and you'll have your press releases down here. So that's real time as things are coming out. So all of your news information, that's your page. Now, when you want to go a little bit deeper and you want to start running some of your own analytics, you come over to data dashboards. So let me take you through 4 of these. We'll start with reserves and resources. Let's give it a second to load up here. This is the data that we're using here is coming from Mining Intelligence, which is the Northern Mining Group is owned by Glacier Media, which trades on the TSX, and Glacier Media is also the majority owner in Mining Intelligence. So this is a product that's fusing both of our kind of leading industry brands. So if you want to know what's going on with reserves and resources for a certain individual company, you can come into your map over here. Why don't we go to the good old Abitibi, right? That's something we're all proud of. So if you notice, we'd be in the Abitibi here. We can kind of go to a project. Let's zoom in a little bit more. See what we got here. There's Agnico, there's Radisson Mining. So you would click on Radisson Mining and you'd see very quickly what they have for indicated, measured indicated, and inferred. So you know where it is, you know what they're doing over there. And I don't know if you wanted to know what was happening in Argentina and you wanted to know, say, what was happening with copper in Argentina, you can use these features down here. And that will show you, for the entire country of Argentina, all the proven and probable reserves for copper. Or you could go, of course, by project as well. You would just come in here, there's Coral Mining, and you'd get Coral Mining's measured and indicated. So that's the reserves and resources very quickly. I'm just going to do this very briefly just to give everyone a taste of what we're up to. Capital raising, this is obviously a pretty important one for any executives out there who want to know what's going on with deal flow. Again, you can go by region. So let's say we wanted to see who's raising money based on projects in Mexico. We would just hit Mexico, and this is going to give me. So here we have all the capital raisings associated with projects in Mexico. You can see the agent. If it's non-brokered, here's Cormark, proposed amount, final amount, quantity, and the financing type, private placement. So very extremely useful tool there as well. If you want to check in on corporate performance, let's go with a good Toronto-based company, Agnico Eagle. You wanted to know what was going on with their cash, and you wanted to know, say, from their income statement, what was happening with, let's do EBITDA. You can quickly see the trend over the last, that'd be a 30-year trend. So these are all, of course, you can manipulate the years, you can manipulate whatever function you want. And then commodity prices, right? We're obviously, it's the Northern Miner, so we want to have a one-stop place where you can go and get all of your commodity prices and also see them on trend and see correlations and see what's happening with that. So that's it in a nutshell. Just wanted to give everyone a quick taste, let you know that we're being busy trying to deliver you cutting edge and new innovative products ourselves. So watch for this. As attendees at this show, we're going to ensure that once we launch the beta, which will be in the next few weeks, that everyone here that's registered will get to use the beta version for free. So all that we're going to ask is for some feedback on it. What do you like about it? What do you don't like about it? What do you want to see? And even the name at this stage is early stage. I happen to like TNM Alpha. I think it's pretty strong. But give us your feedback, and we're going to incorporate that. This is a product for all of you. Okay, with that, let's have a drink. Thank you, everyone.